The following program is for mature audiences only. Football talk shows, most of them sound like this. Blah, 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 blah. Not this one. That's because it features the former director of college scouting with the Chicago Bears. He worked on the staff that drafted, the likes of Devin Hester, Olin Kreutz, Lance Briggs. He's the man who takes shit from absolutely nobody. He's Greg Gabriel. Gabriel joins longtime Chicago sports reporter David Schuster. And this is, accordingly, Gabriel Schuster Talk Bears.
And welcome into another edition of the Gabriel Schuster Podcast. I'm David Schuster, and he, of course, is Greg Gabriel, a man I learn something from each and every time I either have you on the radio, as I did in the past, or sit next to you. Greg, it's good to see you. How you feeling, buddy?
I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm doing well. Also, obviously the pandemic continues, but we make do. You have no choice in today's world, right?
There's a lot more sports now than there was 6 weeks ago, so we're in good shape.
That is absolutely true. And coming up on this podcast, we're going to hear from another good friend of yours, a very well-informed person in the world of pro and college football, Daniel Jeremiah of the NFL Network. You can read his column, as always, on NFL.com. And I'm going to tease him a little bit because he's a San Diego Padres fan, so we'll sneak that in there. But he certainly knows his football.
Yes, he does. And he was a scout for a long time for the Ravens and the Eagles. I think he started with the Browns.
He did.
Played wide receiver at Appalachian State. Really, really good guy, very, very knowledgeable. Went into the TV business, I think, in 2012. Because actually, I went to Philadelphia as a consultant, and it was right after he left, and they had some openings. Phil Savage left, and he left. Phil went to take over the Senior Bowl, and Daniel went to get on the broadcasting business. All
right, I should say that, of course, Aldo is here producing today's show, and Aldo is certainly going to chime in because he knows football not as well as you do, Greg, but a lot more than I do. So we certainly want to hear from Aldo during this broadcast as well. But I want to start with the Bears, both of you gentlemen. And obviously the story continues to be Mitch Trubisky and Nick Foles. And it's interesting. I want to ask you about this specifically, Greg, because obviously you were up at Hallis Hall many, many years in your capacity up there. Matt Nagy says, yes, he watches both these guys very closely, and he seems to be complimentary of how both guys are doing in practice. But he says the real, when he digs in to see how these guys did, it's not with his own eyes. It's when he looks at the film after practice. And I'm just wondering, why is that so important to coaches?
You just see so much more watching the tape than you do during the course of a play live. Because you can only focus on one thing in the court when you're watching something live. But when you watch the tape, you can go back and forth, and look at 3 or 4 different things. So is he making the right reads? Where's his eyes going? Is he going from number 1 to number 2 to number 3, back to number 1? That type of thing. What are the other players doing? Are they running the right route? A lot of times, you see an incomplete pass, and the first thing you're going to say is, the quarterback was off target. Well, maybe he's off target because the receiver ran the wrong route. There's a lot of things that go into that, and without watching the tape, you're not going to get a definitive answer as to what was right, what was wrong.
All right, you say they watch his eyes. Is the film, the tape, is it that specific where you can see where his eyes are as he's looking down the field? I know they have those 2 guys, one on each end of the field up in those, I don't know what you call them, those caterpillar things or whatever, where they're about 30 stories up.
Used to be. Now everything is remote. You got these little remote cameras, and
really,
it's done. That's the eye in the sky, and you have a director, so to speak.
No kidding.
Yeah, just sitting in a box, working all the different cameras. But generally, you have 2 different focuses or views for every play. You got a side view and an end zone view, and it's the end zone view where you can watch his head. Obviously, you can't see his eyes, but you can watch his head and see where he's looking. So if he's going to number 1, number 2, like I said before, and then back, you're going to see that by how his head moves.
All right, we're going to hear from Khalil Mack, who doesn't talk to the media very often. We'll catch up with him in just a minute or two. But I want to ask you about a couple of things that have been going on, and there's there's been some roster moves as well. One of the most interesting things that was pointed out over the last few days is Cordero Patterson has been moved from wide receiver to running back. He's obviously going to still be returning kicks, and I think he's going to be used all over the field, but they're using him more in training camp as a running back, and I'm just wondering what both you guys think about that. Is he made to be a running back? And does he have the body to be a running back? There's a lot more punishment at that position than there is at wide receiver. At least I think so.
Well, he's got the body. He's bigger than any back they have on the roster right now. He's probably 225, 230 pounds. Got great speed. New England was really the first team to do a lot with him at that running back position. Runs a little bit upright. That's the biggest negative. But with his speed and when the ball, he's got good vision, good cutback skills. He gets in the open field and he's a big play waiting to happen.
Yeah, I thought that all along, that this backup running back that I was expecting the Bears to bring in some veteran off the free agent wire and so forth. Little did I know that he was on the roster already. It's Cordero Patterson. I think that Matt Nagy had that in his plans for months now, and they weren't concerned about getting a veteran. They've got him, and it's going to be interesting to see him because he is explosive, and there were some plays last year where he really fired up the team running out of the backfield.
Yeah, I actually thought they underused him on their roster last year because we had been led to believe, and I don't know as much about, listen, fantasy people know more about these players than actually some of us in the broadcast medium because they follow him for obvious reasons, and I just thought they underused him, Greg, last season.
Yeah, I think so, but again, it was how well had he picked up this offense, new terminology. Was he playing fast within the system? And he was also learning two positions. He played some running back last year, played some wide receiver, and returning kicks. And getting back to your point about, didn't have as many touches, say, as you expected. I think that's what it gets down to, is touches per game. Mm-hmm. And you're going to go into the season saying, I want to see Tariq Cohen get 12 to 15 touches a game. Well, that's not 12 to 15 carries. That's returns,
sure,
receptions, carries. And the same thing, with Patterson and Montgomery. They're going to map out just about how many touches they want each player to have in those positions, and they're going to work the offense accordingly to make sure those guys get that many touches.
All right, you mentioned David Montgomery, and this was a story over the last week or so where he added 5 pounds in the offseason, and they made such a big deal out of that. 5 pounds isn't that big a deal. At least it isn't to me. Maybe it is to some people. I'm not going to even say what gender if you put on 5 pounds in an off season. But, why did they make such a big deal out of a running back? I mean, I would hope that's 5 pounds of muscle. Help me out to understand that.
I think he gained 5 pounds and lost body fat.
Okay.
And what you do with all these players is you are measuring. They have a thing called the bod pod at Hellas Hall. Player sits in and it gives you percentage of body fat. And at each position, you've got an ideal percentage that you want the players to have depending on the position. And I can go back, I'll give you a great example. Nate Vasher. With defensive backs, you'd like to see them, in that 6 to 8% body fat level, even lower if you can get it. Nate Vasher was always in that 12 or 13% and could never get lower, and that's just the way his body makeup was. Mm-hmm. No matter what he did, he was never going to be lower than that, say, 12%, and sometimes I think he was even higher than that. But in a way that can slow you up, it can cause more injuries because you're not at that optimum level. So and I don't know what the percentage body fat is with Montgomery, but maybe let's just say it was 11%, just for the throw a number out there. Last year, now he's 5 pounds heavier, and maybe his body fat's down to 8% or 7.5% or whatever. That means his lean weight is a lot more than 5 pounds because he lost percentage of body fat and he gained muscle weight, and that's going to make him that much more.
All right, I'm not a football savant like either of you two, but actually I was led to believe Montgomery coming in from college was going to be much more explosive once he got into the open field, and I didn't see that. Conversely, I thought, especially as the season rolled on, that he ran between the tackle a lot better than we were led to believe. So maybe he's going to become more explosive going forward. I don't know.
Well, I in all honesty, when you look at running backs, I think it's very hard to find that guy that's going to consistently break a long run. It just doesn't happen that often in the NFL anymore. Years ago it did. Defenses were different, but not in today's game. And if you can get him to get, 5 or 6 carries over the course of the season that are 20 or 25 yards and longer, he's had a hell of a season as far as big plays.
What I would like to know from Greg is perhaps are we going to see David Montgomery get 20 touches per game? Because that was a big problem with this team and with this team's defense being its number one asset. You want to have an offense that complements a defense, and Matt Nagy's offense does not complement a defense.
Although I don't know if it's Montgomery's going to get 20, 25 running touches a game, but it's how many rushes they have per game between the combination of Montgomery, Patterson, Cohen, and then the quarterback running with the ball too. So, and that would be more Trubisky than Foles, because Foles isn't known for his running ability. Trubisky is. So I think that's what it really gets down to. And then when you look, there's been some articles in the paper, they're focusing more on an outside zone type play versus inside zone. And actually there's not a big difference in the blocking. It's the play call itself and how they, it's more on the running back than it is on the blockers. So it's just, I think they're trying to open up the game, try to get some big plays like Kansas City and Philadelphia's had in the run game that they didn't have here in Chicago last year.
All right, let's hear from Khalil Mack, who does not talk very often, to be honest with you. It's almost like E.F. Hutton. Is E.F. Hutton even around anymore?
I don't think
They're not around?
No.
All right, well, hopefully Khalil Mack will be around for a long time. E.F. Hutton, when they spoke, you were supposed to listen. Anyway, Khalil Mack, and I share his opinion of this first soundbite from him. I didn't think he had a very good year last year for a guy who you traded 2 first-round picks for. Now, obviously, he was double and sometimes even triple-teamed, and that had a big bearing on why he wasn't very, didn't have the performance of the season before. Anyway, bottom line is he wasn't happy with how he performed last year.
It wasn't good enough at all, and so understanding that the different intangibles that came with it, I don't make any excuses. I just rise to the occasion, and I'm getting ready for this one. It's going to be a fun one, man. I can't wait.
Okay, so why did he not perform as well last year?
It was a lot of factors, man. Playing this game, you deal with all type of stuff. And I'm not one to make excuses, but I'm going to make sure I'm out there with my brothers, giving it my all every week. And that's what y'all saw. And so, not to get into details, but man, we ready this year. We ready for it all.
And he says this year again will be different.
I want to say a new mindset. I would say a new approach. Knowing how I'm gonna approach the game this year, it's gonna be fun, man. Same way I love to play. I love this game, and I just can't wait, man. Can't wait.
He can't wait. That's his out cue on every cut, by the way. And finally, he talks about Robert Quinn, and I think this will make a difference to him this season.
Man, Rob is a hell of a player, man, and an even better person. And I know it's just gonna be fun to be out there with a guy that's going 110 miles per hour on the other side, and I can't wait.
You should explain why it sounds like he's having sex.
Yeah, well, listen, that would be a story in itself. He was on his Peloton at home while he was doing this. He was supposed to do it from Hallis Hall. He forgot. They, delayed it a little bit. He went home. He's on his Peloton, and so he's breathing very heavily. No, he's not. Watching something on TV and doing something. He was watching something on his Peloton, if you will, Greg. So we have to point that out.
No, I had read that, and I thought that tells you a little bit about him. Now, he practices all day at Hallis Hall.
Yeah.
Goes home. They get done with meetings. He goes home, and what's he doing? He's working out while he's doing an interview with the Chicago media.
He's a beast, and I say that in all complimentary sense. I mean, even when you just stand anywhere near him, you feel, oh my God, this is a football player. He is out of the mold of Dick Butkus. He's going to annihilate, hopefully, the other team's quarterback or running back or whatever. He had an off season last year for him. I mean, 8.5 sacks for most people is a really good season. Not for him, because he expects double digits at the minimum. But there was a lot of reasons. Obviously, Akeem Hicks going down last year affected him. The fact that there were other injuries to the outside linebackers. Floyd did not do what the Bears had hoped he would do. They're hoping that Robert Quinn does it. If Quinn can come from one side and Mack can come from the other, and it's going to hurt not having Eddie Goldman, but hopefully other people can fill the void there, then I anticipate that you can't double team, especially if Quinn can, come from the other side. You're not going to be able to double team Khalil Mack, and hopefully he'll get back to, because his first year with the Bears was eye-opening, for me at least.
No question. His presence is felt whenever he's on the football field. He's a superb pass rusher. He had 8.5 sacks. I think that's the only time in his career when he hasn't hit double-digit sacks. But, yeah, you can put it – there's a lot of reasons for that. You look at the tape, double and triple teamed on some plays. Hicks is out. Floyd, and Floyd actually did not have a bad season. What Floyd didn't give you was a presence as a pass rusher. Mm-hmm. And that was the main thing, and that affected Mack a little bit too, because they could focus on stopping Mack and didn't, they could do one-on-one blocking with Floyd, and he did not give that strong pass rush from the other side. When you got Quinn coming in from the other side, and you mentioned Eddie Goldman, I don't think when you get into the pass game, his loss is going to be dramatic, because that's not his game. He's a run stopper. You're still going to have Robertson Harris. You're going to have Bill Allen there, and those guys getting a push up the middle, and then with Mack and Quinn on the outside, I think that's going to make a big difference once the season starts in 3 weeks.
All right, there's so much more to talk about the Bears, and we will, but right now let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to talk to Daniel Jeremiah of the NFL Network and also NFL.com. You're listening to the Schuster, or I should say Great Gabriel Schuster podcast. Listen, I'm sorry, I stole your thunder a little bit and tried to get top billing. I know it's not in my contract, but I've tried to sneak that in at least one time. Let's take a quick break. We'll be back right after this.
Don't miss any future Gabriel Schuster Talk Bears podcast or any one of the other over a dozen podcasts the Barroom Network has available. All you gotta do is go to iTunes or Stitcher or Podbean, wherever you get your podcast, and subscribe to Bears Barroom Radio Network. All of our podcasts will then be automatically downloaded to your device. You can also listen to our podcast on our YouTube channel, Bears Barroom, and on Spotify, Bears Barroom Radio Network.
Bears Barroom.
Welcome back to the Gabriel Schuster Football Podcast. I am David Schuster. He, of course, is Greg Gabriel. And Greg, right now, we have a very special guest, Daniel Jeremiah. You've known Daniel for quite a while. He's, of course, from the NFL Network. He writes a column for NFL.com. You can follow him on Twitter. Love the moniker Move the Sticks, at Move the Sticks. Daniel Jeremiah, and I'll let you do a little bit more of a formal introduction, Greg.
DJ, how you been, my friend?
Well, I'm doing great, buddy. It's great to catch up with you, man. It's I'm enjoying being on the media side during this upcoming year, because I think if we were back in our old gigs here, man, this would be kind of a challenging time here trying to figure this whole thing out.
I've talked to a few guys, and they want to get out on the road, but they can't. They got to do all their scouting from their home office. How different do you think that's going to be for most scouts not going out this year?
Well, I mean, you talk about creatures of habit. I mean, that's scouts. I mean, they're used to going to the same schools and the same rotation at the same time of year, talking to the same people. So it's totally different. And now it's not even and we were talking about this before we went on, but it's not even apples to apples. It's not like all of college football is not playing, and so every area of the country for your scouts are on the same plan. Now you've got some conferences are going, some aren't going. Some scouts might have the freedom to be able to, what they're saying, potentially get to sit in the stands, spread out and get a chance to sit in the stands to see some live games. While if you're a scout on the West Coast, there's no football. There's no football out here. So you're just watching tape from 2019. So it's a challenge for all these guys. Now,
being you've been on the road for a long time, we both have. How difficult is that when you have just tape to look at? and you're trying to put a board together, you're trying to put a grade on a guy. You don't see any growth in his play from 219 to the 2021 draft because he's not playing at 220. How difficult do you think that's going to be for the scouts?
Well, it goes both ways, right? I mean, we all have a million stories. Remember, we go into a school in August, and you'd get super fired up about a couple guys, and then you go watch them during the fall, and you're like, man, this guy's terrible. Like we bought into what we saw just in a little bit here, but once we got more exposure to them, we realized we kind of saw the flaws. And on the other side of it, you get in there and see some of these guys, you watch them on junior tape, and maybe they're spot starters or they're just kind of blend into the scenery, and then you go out there and you get out there and see them in the fall, and they've put on 15 pounds and they're moving around better, and you find out they had something wrong with their ankle the year before, and they look like different people. You're just not going to get that information. I think one of the biggest things I've been advocating for in this weird year is that they would alter the rule. If the competition committee would get together and the league would get together and say, hey, I know in the past we've not allowed NFL personnel to have any access to any of these training facilities or when these guys are training and working out during this time of the year. But the fact, Greg, we don't have a season. I mean, just being able to eyeball guys, and you don't even have to test them, but just so you could see a guy move around a little bit, see how he's carrying his weight, even if it was just if they allowed it once a month to have NFL personnel just peek in and look at some of these guys. I can't imagine not seeing these players in person for over a calendar year.
No, I agree with you, and it's really a good idea to do that, but good ideas in the league office don't always come hand in hand. We both know how that works out. I had a conversation earlier today. I don't know if you know Gerald Dixon, who used to be the assistant pro guy with the Bills, and he worked with me in the XFL at DC.
Yeah.
And we were talking about, scouting this year, and, last year he had a draft where basically no pro days. So he had a combine, and if the guy worked at the combine, you got an idea of what he could do. If he didn't work out at the combine, you were SOL, so to speak. And then and there's some guys you didn't even get a medical on. Well, this year, if they're not playing football, and then you go ahead and you draft these guys next year, what we were talking about is the effect it could have, say, 2 or 3 years down the road, especially if you have a successful draft taking guys that didn't play football in the 2020 season. What's ownership or the people that run the budget's going to say, well, what do we need all these scouts for? Look what happened. We had a great draft. So that could be an adverse effect to scouting, not knowing what's going to happen in the future with this.
Yeah, I think, and I'm hopeful what we're going to see, and talking to some of my buddies around the league, is that you're going to see the value of the scouts in terms of the relationships that they've been able to develop. Especially the way, back in the day, it was really good scouts. When we talked about good scouts, we talked about guys who could identify players and, who can play. And then you could get anybody to go in there and get some background information. Well, now the way it's kind of evolved, or the scouts being able to get that good information, there's so much else readily available in terms of the tape and the access to all that stuff that you feel like you have a good shot of figuring out the player. It's can you figure out the character and the person. So the hope is that teams that have invested in quality scouts and guys that have experience and guys that have built up relationships, that getting good information from these sources is going to be more valuable than ever. So I'm hopeful that they'll see the value in scouts coming through this process. And I think what we'll see in a couple of years is, you talked about the potential of maybe having a good draft when you're flying blind. I think what's going to happen is we're going to see a higher number of busts in the first round this year than we've ever seen before, and it's going to show that, man, we do need to be able to see these guys and have scouts out there to see them in person. So that's going to be an interesting case study 3 years from now, how this whole thing turns out.
You brought it up, talking about relationships that scouts have with coaches, and this year, especially if you're talking Big Ten and Pac-12, how the coaches aren't going to be around these kids if they're not playing football. And some of them, like you talked about before, they could be going off to these workout facilities. So now you're calling the coach up on the phone. You want to get an idea about work habits, background, character, etc. How up to date and how good is that coach's opinion going to be when he really hasn't been around this football player since, say, July of this year.
Well, what it's done is it's made it very important. You better start establishing relationships with these facilities. Now, that's something I've tried to do just in the role that I'm in, is get to know the guys that are running these different places. And if you have good relationships with them, they're not going to give you the company line. You can find out guys that have missed workouts, guys that show up on time, guys who end up emerging as the leaders of their groups. So the coaches, I think that information is still really good in terms of when they were around them, but you better get an update in terms of where those guys have been and what they've been doing since. So we wouldn't have to worry about that stuff back in the day. Even though there was only a couple workout facilities, most guys worked out at the school, so that relationship was not necessary. I think now, if you're a scout, and you better be figuring out where these kids are training, and you better find some moles, for a lack of a better word, on the inside.
Well, when I was with Chicago, we used to do that a lot. We made, at least with the head of the workout facility, we tried to develop a good relationship with him so that we could get good background information on that player, as far as, like you just said, showing up on time, how hard does he work, is he a leader within the group or a guy that follows, that type of stuff. And we generally got good information, but you didn't want to let that out and let other people know you're doing it, because any type of competitive advantage you had, you got to go with.
That's a great point. You try and keep that to yourself. I mean, one of the things I would do last year, a great example, so Mekhi Becton, who the Jets took in the first round, I really liked him as a player, and he's just a rare human being, just how big and how powerful he is. But one of the questions on him was the weight, right? He'd been up around 400 pounds at one point in time at Louisville early on. So I don't want to just call and say, hey, how does he look? Is he in good shape? How's he moving around? I had from people at the training facility, and it got to the point where I think it was Becton himself, I had them sending videos to me of him getting on the scale. So I could see him getting on the scale. They would show the number, what he was at. Okay, he's 358, he's 361, whatever he is. But they sent me that multiple times through the process. And I don't have to draft a kid, but I've got to give an opinion on him. So, having that type of information and being able to get video from some of these guys, hey, this, player, he missed half the season last year. Now they don't have a year this year. Send me some video of this kid, going through some DB drills. I want to see him move around, see how healthy he looks, and you'll be surprised the amount of video you'd be able to get if you have the right relationships.
Oh, no question about it.
We're talking to Daniel Jeremiah of NFL Network. You can read his columns on NFL.com. He also is the color commentator for the Chargers Radio Network, and of course you can follow him on Twitter at MoveTheSticks. Daniel, I know you did extensive work on the most previous of drafts, and the Bears didn't have a first-round pick, but they had two keepers, it looks like, in the second round. I'm sure you know a lot about both these guys, Cole Kmet and Jalen Johnson. Kmet is already, getting a lot of raves, what he is all about with the Bears training camp, and Johnson's still coming off that shoulder injury, but they drafted him in the second round to be a starter eventually, maybe even right off the bat here in this regular season. What can you tell us about both these guys as they go forward?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of both of them. Cole Kmet, somebody that did so many different things in Notre Dame. He played in line, they flexed him out. He is obviously a huge catch radius at his size. He's almost 6'6". So you've got a big hulking guy who still looked like he had room to grow into his frame, who could make every type of catch down the seam that you wanted to see with that big radius. I remember he had a big one-hander against Georgia in that game. In the run game, he's more than adequate. They used him a lot on combo blocks. He can work up in space and just more really willing in the run game and can protect. So to me, like, you look at a tight end, if you want to describe a skill set, you want somebody that's big, somebody that can get down the seam, and somebody that can help you in the run game, and if you need to, can protect. He does all those things really well, and I just, with the baseball background, I still think that there's improvement ahead for him, just being solely dedicated to football at the professional level. So I was a little bit surprised he was there where he was when they got him. And then Jalen Johnson, I think Jalen Johnson, I'm looking it up right here. Jalen Johnson, he was the 50th pick, huh? He was my 29th player in the draft. So I thought that was a tremendous value. Speed, toughness, can play up, can play off. I thought he had good vertical speed. He got some catch-up speed to him. They didn't throw at him last year at Utah. They avoided him. So I think people that kind of nicked him on, with the playmaking ability, well, you can't make plays if they don't want anything to do with you. So I thought he was a very competitive, a very good player.
Daniel, the guys have let me ask a couple of questions here. I'm Aldo Gandia, the producer of the show. I know that you work the Senior Bowl every year. One of the guys you saw at this recent Senior Bowl was Kindle Vildor, who the Bears selected in the draft. What can you tell us about the cornerback from Georgia Southern?
You talk about competitive. Again, he kind of fits that same mold in some way that's just very feisty and physical. Not the biggest guy in the world, but he had tons of production. He get up into you. He can press you. The only thing that I nicked him on a little bit was, there were some times in space where he had some missed tackles, but I thought overall just his competitiveness, his ball skills were really, really good. And that's the conference I played in. They were our rivals, so it pains me to say anything nice about a Georgia Southern football player, but he's a good one.
And my other question was, I know you scouted Mitch Trubisky when he was down at North Carolina extensively, and so what did you see in his college tape that impressed you? What were you concerned about, and what can you tell us about him as a pro over the last 3 years that you've seen him? What has he improved on, and what does he still need to improve on?
Well, I mean, obviously the biggest concern or knock on him was that he just hadn't played a lot in college. I mean, that was the whole storyline, was just getting him some more work. But I thought he was the two things I thought about him in college, and I had him as I think my 32nd player that year. But I thought he was very efficient. I thought he was very athletic. And I've always been a little bit bewildered a little bit with the Bears that they haven't used more of his athleticism. To me, I would actually have some design quarterback runs with him and let him get knocked around and kind of loosen him up a little bit. But he can make plays with his legs. When he's been confined in the pocket, he just hasn't always looked comfortable, and he's missed too many easy throws. So that's been that's kind of been the story of his career thus far. But you've got the arm strength to make every kind of throw you need to make. I don't know. I'd love to know where Greg is on this, but I've always, watching this team, I thought they would eventually try and cut him loose and move him around more than they have.
Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't do that. Now, in fairness, last year I didn't watch as much because I was in D.C. most of the year trying to prepare for the XFL season. But still, you saw, looking at the 2018 season, the arrow was going up. They were, a kick away from getting to the NFC Championship game, and yet you expected big things from him last year, and nothing happened. In fact, his game actually went downhill, and nobody really seems to have an answer as why that happened.
Yeah, he's a little bit of an enigma. I mean, he's got the ability. He's got plenty of ability. I mean, he's got the skill set that you want, but he just hasn't been able to get totally comfortable there. I mean, I think it was 13 starts, right? I think he had 13 starts at North Carolina. So that's a little bit of a warning sign, to be honest with you, of this upcoming draft, is that we're going to have a lot of players at different positions in a similar boat where we just haven't got a lot to evaluate that on.
Yeah, and then you're guessing, and when you're guessing, you're prone to make mistakes.
Good point.
Hey, Daniel, I'm told through the grapevine that you're a big San Diego Padres fan. Is that correct?
I would say the biggest. I don't know.
Okay.
I always I laugh because, if anything happens with the Padres, when they signed Manny Machado, I get calls from my buddies in the national media to come on all their shows because they literally say I'm the only Padre fan that they know. So I'll go on there as a football guy to talk about the Padres. But it's been a rough time being a Padre fan my entire life. I watched Tony Gwynn and a lot of bad baseball for most of my life here. So now we've got this young shortstop in Fernando Tatis, who's the most exciting player in baseball. And Machado's, as an all-star third baseman. We've got a really fun team. So I'm not apologizing for it. I deserve this after long suffering following this baseball team.
Well, White Sox fans certainly have a lot of young talent here in Chicago, and I'm sure if you're a baseball fan, you know about some of them. But White Sox fans would love to have Fernando Tatis back. Is there any chance?
James Shields,
oh my God, worst trade in Major League history. Unbelievable. We're skipping sports here real quickly, but he had given up 10 runs in a third of an inning in his last outing in a Padres uniform, and then they traded for him, and if the handwriting wasn't on the wall right off the bat, I don't know what that was the dumbest trade of all time.
Yeah, that's going to be one that they talk about for a very long time. And the good news is, gosh, the White Sox have all these other good young players.
Yeah.
To make you imagine if they had Tatis in the middle of that order, holy cow.
Yeah, off the charts. Hey, listen, you're off the charts as well. We appreciate the information today, and we look forward, if we can, somewhere down the road, especially knock on wood, this season does occur, and everybody stays healthy, and we hope to talk to you again somewhere down the road.
Oh, it's great to catch up with all you guys. Greg, appreciate the invite, man, and we'll keep in touch.
Yes, thanks, and I'll be in contact with you, and you can let me know what's going on with the Chargers.
All right, sounds good, brother. Take care.
Okay,
All right, thanks a lot. That's Daniel Jeremiah of the NFL Network, and again, NFL.com. You can follow him on Twitter at MoveTheSticks. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back right after this.
Are you interested in winning some money? Well, get a bunch of friends together, start a fantasy football league, and then listen to the Fantasy Football Goon because he'll take you to victory. Fantasy Football Goon, every week here on the Barroom Network.
Welcome back to the podcast, and once again, we thank Daniel Jeremiah for joining us, Greg, and I'll tell you what, that man knows his stuff, and as we were talking about during the break here, I love it when you ask about players from years past, and they still have the scouting report. It's like a golfer who just remembers every shot of a tournament. If they played Conway Farms from 10 years ago, he remembers every shot. That's how these scouts are, and you're, of course, included in that. You never forget the players that you were scouting.
Well, especially the guys that you liked. If you didn't like the guy,
Forget him quickly.
Yeah, that one's a different story. But and the ones you didn't like and turn out to be good players, you're always looking for a hole in their game to see, I was right. And you were wrong. You got to admit it.
All right, a few more things before we get out of here. I want to go back to the Bears, and I want to get Aldo's opinion on this as well. I saw that the Bears are bringing in, they're off today on Monday, so they'll be back at a training camp tomorrow, but they're bringing in a kicker, Caro Santos, I believe is how you pronounce his name, and he's been like a mannequin. He's modeled 5 different uniforms around the NFL so far. I saw that Eddie Pinheiro does have a groin injury, but is this competition, or are they just, backing themselves up just in case Pinheiro is not healthy?
I think it's B. Backing themselves up in case he's not healthy. A key position. You've got to have somebody ready to kick. And this year, with the practice squad rules the way they are, and you can have 16 guys, I think, on the practice squad, don't be shocked if this injury lingers with him, that they keep a second guy on the practice squad, because you can go back and forth. Used to be, had to put these guys through waivers. That's not going to be the case this year. You can bring them up to the varsity, put them back down on the practice squad, and they don't have to go through waivers. So that could well be the case this year, especially early in the season. If Pinheiro's got a problem with the groin, they can go with another kicker for a few games, and then and just keep rotating them back and forth between the varsity and the practice.
And Aldo, I was going to say this: there's no worse injury for a kicker than a groin injury. That's as bad as it gets.
Or an amputated foot, but although Tom Dempsey did have a club foot, and
63 yards later.
Exactly. But I agree with Greg. I think that the Bears really love Pinheiro, and let me remind you also that Santos was with the club before, and that was the famous John Fox called him Carlos Santos. But he was 4 or 5 with the Bears, missed his very first kick, a 53-yarder, I believe, in Philadelphia, but went on to make his next 4 kicks, and then he hurt his groin, and then the Bears' kicking game has never been the same since then.
All right, let's switch to the defense, and I know both you guys were big fans of Artie Burns as a potential at defensive back. He's gone on injured reserve. Help me out, guys. Does that mean he misses, hopefully they play a whole season, that he misses a certain amount of games automatically? And what kind of knock on the Bears defense is losing the competition at that position?
Okay, the way the rule works is if you go on injured reserve before the final cut down, then he's already been placed on injured reserve. He's done for the year.
Well, that's too bad.
Okay, now in his case, he tore an ACL, so he'd be done for the year anyway. 10, that's a 10-month injury, sometimes 12 months or whatever. So, but now with other guys, they get hurt, and they think it might be 6 weeks down the road that he can come back. You wait till after the cut down to 53. Then you put him on IR, and then you can bring him back after he's spent 6 weeks on injured reserve.
And Greg, am I reading too much into the fact that they replaced Artie Burns' roster spot with a wide receiver and not a cornerback? Does that mean they're probably happy with Tolliver and the way Jalen Johnson is progressing from his injury?
Well, I think, that Johnson, from what I've read, is not participated fully all the time because they're bringing him along slowly because of the shoulder. Probably smart on that end, but I'm sure he's getting enough reps as far as 7-on-7 and 1-on-1s, that type of thing. They're keeping him out of some of the live stuff. There's that, and they've also mentioned that the DC, the coordinator, and the defensive backfield coach mentioned that Buster Skrine can play both inside and outside. I see him strictly as an inside player. Can you get away with him outside? Yeah, but you don't want him playing all game or more than one game outside. You can play that card for a little while, but then people are going to try to take advantage of it.
All right, guys, as we record this, it's 3 weeks from yesterday, that the Bears will open up the season. They will beat the Lions 27-13, and if you bet the game and you lose it, from what I'm saying, don't worry, we'll burn this tape automatically. But the bottom line is 3 weeks from yesterday, the Bears and the Lions open up the regular season. Now, usually at this point, we're just about to start the preseason, and you always hear, there's no game planning for the first or second preseason game, if any of the games, and they're already practicing for that first opponent. Well, now that there's no preseason this year, is that all they're doing, is basically practicing for that Lions game right off the bat?
That's a great question. In fact, looking at the schedule, if this was a normal schedule, this would be the, quote, dress rehearsal game this coming week, the third preseason game. And then next week, everybody would sit down and you'd see the guys who were going to get cut the next day playing that last preseason game. So that part's been changed. They've only been in contact for a week. So, and we talked about this, weeks ago. It's the whole calendar of training camp has changed, but still, you want to have guys fresh for when the season starts. So when do you start to pull off? Is that last week and this week are going to be heavy contact weeks, and then you start to pull off? Or are they going to even have some more heavy contact the week after? My thinking is because of the way the offseason has gone and the way the preseason has gone, they're going to have some heavy contact until about 10 days before that first game. And you can look at it at the college game too. And the college plays no preseason games. They got 4 weeks of practice, 4.5 weeks of practice, and then they go out and play a game. Now, granted, these are professionals, but that's what they have to do to get ready for the season, and that's what they're doing in the NFL game right now. So if you use the college game as a calendar, we're going to have about another week and a half of heavy practice.
All right, speaking of the college game, the AP preseason poll just came out a little bit before we started this recording, and Clemson is number one as well. They should be. But the number 2 team in the country as of today is the Ohio State Buckeyes, who are not supposed to play any games this season. So let me just pose a rhetorically stupid question. Let's just say Clemson loses a game along the line. There's no other undefeated teams. Is Ohio State, because they go undefeated and untied and on everything, to be honest with you, are they the national champions? This is so damn weird.
Let's be realistic here. How can the AP in their right mind
even have a poll?
Yeah. Well, even if they have a poll, include any team from the Big Ten or the Pac-12?
Yeah.
I don't know.
They're not playing football.
I don't know.
They're 0-0 going into the season, and they're going to be 0-0 coming out of the season. End of discussion. So, is there going to be a national champion? How can you have a national champion? The best teams are playing now. You can say, yeah, the SEC's playing, and so the winner of the SEC could be the national champion, and then have them play Clemson, for the national championships. But who knows how it's going to happen? I just hope, we got 3 weeks. The college season has been pushed back a week, so it's actually kicking off the same time as the NFL season. So that's going to be a huge weekend as far as college football on Saturday, the NFL on Saturday. Actually, Thursday, the NFL kicks off. Saturday will be the college opening kickoff, and then Sunday, the NFL again. 3 weeks from now, we're going to have a lot to talk about when we do this podcast.
Yeah, we definitely will, all season long. I can't wait to analyze in advance and then certainly after the fact all the different Bear games. I mean, come Monday, I am the all-time Monday morning quarterback, especially if they might lose a game. You talk about a cynic. You're sitting next to one, Greg. I'm telling you. Anyway,
see, I always look for the positives, so that'll get interesting when we get in.
I find the humor, to be honest with you.
Me too. I got a question for Greg. You accurately said that this would be the week that this is the dress rehearsal game, so the starters are playing 3 quarters, and if any team would be into a quarterback competition, I would imagine that after this week, that a decision would be made. So here's my question: is at what point does Matt Nagy have to make a decision on who the number 1 quarterback is, so that they can really prepare for the Detroit Lions and get the majority of snaps in practice?
I'm going to answer it with a question: how do you know he hasn't?
Wow.
He tells the media he hasn't, and he tells Detroit he hasn't, because he wants Detroit to prepare for 2 different players. But in his mind, I guarantee he's already got a decision.
And you know what? If reporters were allowed to talk to the players, a good reporter would probably find out that information. He would sucker up or something to one of the players, and he would find out that Trubisky or Foles had more of the snaps, and you would know. But unfortunately, in today's unfortunate broadcasting situation on Zoom, you can't get these answers because you can't, sidle up to the players. That's just the way it is nowadays.
And they're not seeing the entire practice.
That's right.
So I think there's a few practices where they got to see beginning to end, but for the most part, there's just a portion of practice that reporters are allowed to see. Then they got to leave, and then they have a Zoom conference with the coach and or some certain players. Now, I was Aaron Wilson, who writes for the Houston Chronicle, and I used to work with him at the National Football Post. He was writing about the biggest difference that he sees from this year is that he isn't able to create a relationship with the new and
Sure.
free agents and some of the young players, get to know them a little bit, so that somewhere down the line he can get useful information and have a useful discussion with them. That's going to be the real difficult thing for him, he thought, this year, and I'm sure it's going to be with a lot of other reporters.
It's going to be really interesting when we get to the regular season, how reporters, and listen, I've gone to baseball games already. I don't really need to go to the games at Wrigley or Guaranteed Rate Field. I can watch it on TV and just talk to the damn players via Zoom after the game. I mean, I'm going for my own gratification to see the games in person. But listen, you could sit at home and do the same thing nowadays, and it could be the same thing for football. I hate the word Zoom. It just bugs me.
I noticed that about you. All right, since you brought it up, I got to ask you, over the decades that you've been following professional sports here in Chicago, what player, name a name of a guy who was your source, who you saddle up with? Come on, give me a name.
I can't do that. I'll have that in my memoirs. This is not a Stump the Grobber question. This is digging a little bit too deep. Yes, I have had my deep throat sources, if you will, but I can't reveal them at this time.
All right,
I take the fifth.
What sport was the one?
Basketball and baseball.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I'm going to put together a list.
And sometimes it's not just the players, by the way. It could be other people in the organizations. Greg, don't tell them that you are my source.
I don't think I knew you then.
No, you didn't. But it's been this is like they said in the movie Casablanca, the beginning of a great relationship.
There you go.
Let's go back a little. Have you guys watched Hard Knocks at all?
Yes, I saw episode 1. I missed the last one.
Okay, I watched both of them over the weekend, and one of the reasons I wanted to watch, because Pep is the Chargers quarterback coach. I wanted to see if he was going to get into TV time, and he did. But just watching the interaction, how they're practicing, how they're having meetings. The meeting rooms are enormous. At least now they're at the Rams facility and they're at the Chargers facility, which are both brand new facilities.
Right.
But the way they've got the players positioned, you have a coach, and he's got to be 20, 25 feet away from the nearest player. And the players can't be within, you're supposed to be 6 feet apart. They're 10 to 15 feet apart, minimum. None of them are close, and it's just so much different from if you used to go into, and I've been in several of these meetings, they're crammed into a small room, and there's a lot of jocularity that can go on between the coach and the players and stuff. It's none of that. It's all business, and because of the way things are set up, it's just so much different than it's ever been before.
All right, guys, a couple last tidbits here. And again, we're recording this on Monday, and yesterday, like, a real scare was thrown into a lot of people in the sports world, specifically the NFL, as a lot of teams came out with some of the test results of the COVID testing, and a lot of them were false positives. In fact, all 9 from the Bears turned out, I believe, to be false positives. What is going to happen if something like this happens a couple of days before the first regular season game? What chaos would that be? And I hate that we're even talking about this, but we have no choice.
Well, here's the good. Now, these tests took place on Saturday, I think.
At least they got them quickly.
And they knew, in fact, from something I read, Adam Johns had it in The Athletic this morning, or came out midday today. Matt Nagy got a call like 2:15 in the morning about this from the trainer.
Right, I saw that.
That these guys had, all these guys, including a staffer, had tested positive, and as it turns out, they were all false positives. They all came from the same place. It's a lab in New Jersey, and the lab in New Jersey saying they were contaminated. But there's like 6 or 7 different teams affected with all these 77 total cases, I think it was. And you're right. What's going to happen if there was a test on a Saturday and you had to play a game on a Sunday? I think that because of this, they're going to, any pregame testing is going to come down to like a Friday to make sure that if there is a problem, it can get taken care of before kickoff on Sunday.
Okay, but let's just say somebody tests positive. He's been around the whole rest of the team.
Well, if everybody else tests negative, then they can play.
Then they're testing the people he's been around, and then if there's anybody, they're testing those people, and they're trying to get an answer on that, and if they get any type of positive result, then he's quarantined.
I guess. I'm telling you, listen, when I came out of college, I never in a million years would have thought, as I got into this broadcasting world, that I would have to talk about something as crazy as this. I don't know how else to put this.
No, you're absolutely right. And I've worked in the media for decades too. Never have we encountered something like this. And you almost need like a science degree now to be able to report on sports. It's ridiculous.
Well, how about this? That somebody testing positive on a Friday or Saturday, what's that going to do to the betting line? Now that betting is legal, and it could change lines, it could change betting strategies, fantasy football, a lot of things where we wouldn't have talked about it 3 years ago. You're talking about it now.
Really, really strange. All right, Greg, let me ask you this one last thing. We saw recently, this past week, in fact, that Baltimore, during one of the Ravens practices, there was a dust-up, and Earl Thomas was involved in that. All-pro safety, I think 7 different times, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, I guess he's a loose cannon because he had problems in the previous franchise in Seattle. Baltimore, listen, to their credit, I guess, I don't know, they dumped him. Okay, he's now a free agent, and I'm told he'll probably end up with Dallas because, down there they become like the renegade franchise like Oakland was for many years. Would you, as a franchise, if you needed a safety, an all-pro previous safety, would you take a chance? What would you do if you were a general manager?
In all honesty, I mean, you can't answer the question
without doing some specifics.
You've got to do your research.
Yep.
First thing you're going to do is call Seattle and find out from your friends in Seattle, okay, what was he like? You didn't, you got rid of him. Why did you get rid of him? What were the problems? And then you're going to do the same thing with Baltimore. If you know Eric DeCosta, who's the general manager, you're going to call Eric and you're going to say, hey, what happened? Tell me. Am I getting myself into a problem if I bring him into my building? So they'll find that out, and then from there, then it's going to determine if anybody's going to sign him.
You would think at some point a guy gets released by 2 franchises for being a bad apple, for lack of a better term again, that he would realize that his pro football career is hanging by a thread, no matter how good and how talented he is, and the money is still flowing in. If you want that money to continue flowing in, you better get your year blank together. And so, I mean, I don't understand why he hasn't done it already. I never understand in these situations. I just don't.
Well, from a contractual standpoint, he's lost all leverage. So let's say, unless there's 3 or 4 different teams bidding for his services, then obviously the agent's going to have some leverage to get some certain money. But right now, when you're going, a couple weeks before the season, most teams have spent their money, and their cap is pretty much locked up, for this year, and they don't anticipate having that big dollar contract coming in a couple weeks before the season starts. So, what's going to happen with him? I could see him going to a team and getting a 1-year contract, and then it becomes a prove-it deal for him. I can't see him getting a multi-year deal, especially, given the circumstances. The 2 teams have gotten rid of him in 2 years.
But Greg, I remember, I think it was a year ago, maybe it was 2 years ago, when Antonio Brown started to have problems, and you posted something on Twitter saying this is why a lot of teams stayed away from this guy. There was a lot of knuckleheads who came after you on Twitter saying, oh, he had an all-pro season, he went to the Super Bowl, blah, blah, blah. But I got your point. Is this guy might give you a productive season or 2 or 3, but eventually he is poison for an organization, right?
Well, what I said was there was a reason why he went in the 6th round. And I'll be honest, he was not on our board with the Chicago Bears. Mm-hmm. The work we had done said, don't touch this guy. So we didn't, regardless of the talent. And, I use this phrase a lot. Don't forget, as talented as he was, 32 teams said no for the greater part of 6 rounds. That tells you something right there, because, this guy has been great since he came into the league as a player, but he's a problem off the field. He's a problem in the locker room. And that was my point with my tweets, and this was, a year and a half ago. And then after, the Oakland thing, and then I was like, God, didn't I say this?
That's right.
and what was it the spin zone or something like that? That was the guy who was kind of coming at me, and I sent him a DM and go, would you like to take those words back?
Hey guys, I want to wrap it up with this. As good as these podcasts have been the last 4, 5, 6 weeks, whatever it's been, and they have been good, and I'm jaded in saying that, but I also know they've been good. Just wait until the regular season starts, okay? Greg will have all the inside information. Aldo is like the biggest football fanatic that I've come to know, and I'm Mr. Cynic. I just admit it. If they're good, I will tell you. If they're not good, specifically the Bears, and we'll talk about other teams in the NFL, but if the Bears don't play well, my best stuff comes out. I'll be honest with you. So anyway, we're going to have a lot of fun, and once the regular season comes, Aldo, we'll do sometimes more than one a week. We'll look at the games going into the games in advance, and then we'll certainly talk about them as they come out. So anyway, it's been fun again today, guys, and I'm just looking forward. We're less than 3 weeks to the regular season. I don't know how it's going to unfold, especially with the pandemic still ongoing, but I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, I don't think there's a doubt it's going to start. Now, whether it finishes, that's a different story, but baseball had a couple rough outings, but so far in the last few weeks, it's been going good. Same with the NBA, same with the NHL. NASCAR, I keep going back to, they have no problem. NASCAR ran 5 different races in 3 days in Delaware over the weekend. There's never been an instance.
Anyway, guys, it's been fun, and we'll look forward to doing one next week. Take care, everybody.